A dying millionaire refused all treatment until a beautiful doctor risked her career to save him and touched his soul. The ER was too bright. Pale ceiling tiles hummed beneath fluorescent lights. Monitors beeped in measured rhythm. Somewhere down the corridor, a child cried, and a nurse's heels clicked briskly against linoleum. But in Cedar Room 14, the air hung heavy with silence and the smell of antiseptic. Jasper Whitmore stirred on the gurney, eyes fluttering open like the reluctant start of an old machine. His first breath came shallow, pulled tight through aching ribs. For a moment, all he saw was light and then pain, dull and thick, blooming behind his eyes. He blinked again. White walls, 4 lines, oxygen monitor clipped to his finger. No, his body tensed. "Mr. Whitmore," Anner said, moving quickly toward him. "Please don't sit up yet. Your vitals are unstable." Jasper ignored her. He clawed at the IV line in his arm, yanking it free. Blood pulled at the insertion site. "I'm leaving, sir. Your liver and lungs are both severely compromised. You collapse from exhaustion. Your labs show organ strain. Your O2 levels air dropping." "I said I'm leaving." The nurse flinched. Jasper stood, though his knee trembled beneath the weight of his own defiance. He reached for the coat draped over the chair. "You can't walk out like this," she said, her voice straining toward calm. "There are protocols." "I didn't want treatment," Jasper growled. No IVs, no fluids, no doctors with their hollow optimism. "But your condition is critical," he spun toward her. "I trusted you people once, and my wife died for it." The words cracked the air like lightning. The nurse froze. Before she could answer, another voice entered the room. Not loud, but centered, composed. "Mr. Whitmore," X returned. Standing in the doorway was a woman in a white coat, mid-30s, maybe younger. Her blonde hair was pulled back neatly, a few soft strands framing a face that looked more resolutethine, kind more knowing than curious. She stepped inside. "I am Dr. Eleanor Hale," she said calmly. "Oncology." Jasper exhaled a bitter laugh. "Off course, the cancer doctor. Come to save me?" "No," she said. "I came because you collapsed and someone has to care what happens next." He didn't respond. His coat now hung from one arm like he couldn't decide whether to put it on or throw it across the room. Laner walked to the chair across from the hospital bed and sat. She didn't open the chart. She didn't ask questions. Jasper narrowed his eyes. "This is where you tell me about the miracle drug, right? It's a study that gives me 6 extra months." She shook her head. "No." "Then what do you want to be present, Shasade?" "Just that." Silence stretched between them. Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. She didn't look at the 4 stand, or the monitor orth blood dotting the sheet where he'd torn the line out. She looked at him, and somehow not as a billionaire or a diagnosis or a file on her tablet. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe there's nothing more to be done. But if you're wrong, if there's even the smallest chance, you shouldn't be alone when that moment comes." Jasper clenched his jaw, his voice when it came. "Wasro? Final? I've lived enough," he said, "and I don't owe anyone in a therminute." She didn't argue. She stood, reached into her coat pocket, and pulled out a business card, plain, unassuming. "Dr. Eleanor Hale, Oncology." She placed it gently on the tray table beside the bed. "I won't follow you," she said, turning toward the door. "But if one day you stop running, I'll still be here." The door closed behind her with a soft click. Jasper stood frozen, not because of pain, not because of fear, but because for the first time in a long time, someone had not tried to fix him. She had simply chosen to stay. The Whitmore estate rose like a fortress at the edge of the hills, stone and steel, cold and defiant against the soft grays of Thierley afternoon. It was the kind of home built to keep the world out, not welcome it in. Doc Eleanor Hale adjusted her scarf as she stepped from the town car, her shoes clicking softly against the winding slate path. The air smelled of pine and drain-soaked stone. A butler opened the door before she could knock. "Dr. Hale. Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." She was led through a corridor that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. No music, no portraits, no sign of life except rows of books and the faint ticking often, unseen clock. The living room was vast, cavernous. A single grand piano stood, untouched in the corner, its lid slightly open, revealing ivory keys dusted with time. On its stand sat a piece of sheet music, unfinished. The final lines faded abruptly, the ink slightly smudged like a life that had once filled the room and then disappeared. Note. Eleanor stood for a moment, looking at it. Moonlight Sonata, came a voice behind her, deep, distant. She turned. Jasper stood in the doorway, wrapped in a charcoal robe, over casual clothes, his frame thinner than she remembered. His expression was impassive. "My wife was playing it the night before her surgery," he said. "She never finished." Eleanor didn't respond. Not yet. He gestured to Theoch. "Sit if you want. I won't keep you long." She sat quietly, moved toward a side table, and poured tea. One cup for her, one for himself. No sugar, no cream, just hot water and steam curling into the air between them. "This meeting," he said, placing the cup in front of her, "is a legal formality. My attorney requires a specialist's second opinion before finalizing my advance directive." He slid a manila envelope across the coffee table. Inside, medical scans, charts, and a signed declaration fusing further treatment. "I'm not here to change your mind," Eleanor said softly. He looked at her surprised. "No lecture?" he asked. No emotional plea from the brighted young doctor. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Do you know what it's like to lose someone in front of you?" she said, "and not be able to do anything about it?" Jasper said nothing. "My father during my first night on call," she continued, voice low, "collapsed at home, heart attack. I was the closest up, within 10 miles. They brought him in under a name I didn't recognize. By the time I realized who he was," she stopped. E froze. I hesitated, and he was gone. Silence stretched across the room. It was not a silence of indifference. It was the silence of something understood but not spoken aloud. Eleanor didn't apologize. For the story, she didn't offer it as currency. She simply let it hang in the space between them. Jasper leaned back, his hand resting loosely on the arm of the chair. His eyes, once guarded, now flickered with something more human. "Pain, maybe, or memory. You stayed that night at the hospital." I said I did. "Why?" "Because I saw someone who wasn't afraid of dying," Cher replied, "but I wondered if he was afraid of being alone when it happened." Jasper looked away. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, he reached for the pen beside the envelope. He signed the final page without flourish, then closed the folder and handed it to her. "This doesn't mean I'm giving up," he said, voice dry. "It means I'm choosing not to fight a war I never believed in." Eleanor stood, taking the file with her. She didn't argue, didn't protest, but as she walked to the door, she turned back and looked once more at the abandoned piano, at the music left unfinished. "Thank you, Fourth T," she said. He nodded once. When she was gone, Jasper remained still. Thedia beside him had gone cold, but he found himself staring at the music again, hearing perhaps the echo of a note he had tried hard to forget. The next day, the front gate was unlocked. That alone was enough to make Eleanor pause. She stood outside for a moment, holding a slim brown envelope under her coat, the winter wind tugging at her hair. She had no appointment, no invitation, and yet something made her return. The butler opened the door wordlessly and stepped aside. Eleanor walked in, brushing snow from her coat. Jasper was in the same chair as Saya Sturday, a different row, but the same expression, cool, tired, distant. Hucked up from the book in his lap, clearly surprised. "I did not call for another consult," he said flatly. "This is not a consult," Eleanor replied, holding up the envelope. "It is a gift." She placed the envelope on the side table, nodded once, and turned to leave. Jasper stared at it for a while before opening it. Inside was a single CD. Handwritten in elegant script across the white surface were 4 words. Claire's favorite for Jasper. That night, he sat in the same room alone, the fire crackling low, and placed the disc into the old stereo system. Opening notes of Debut's Claire de Lune filled the room, soft and haunting. He did not cry, He did not speak, but he listened. The next day she came again, this time with a small thermos and 2 ceramic cups. Mincha, freshly brewed, no lecture. No charts. She poured 2 cups, placed one beside him, and sat quietly across the room. They did not speak. Jasper stared at the cup for a long time before finally taking a sip. It was just tea, but something about its warmth made his fingers stop trembling. On the 3rd day, Elena brought a single folded article, medical journal piece from a French research lab detailing experimental data on immune response stimulation in light-stage patients. She did not say, "You should try this." She simply laid it on the coffee table beside the tea and said, "I found this interesting." Jasper barely glanced at it, but when she left, he read every word. Days turned into a quiet pattern. Eleanor returned. Each afternoon with something, sometimes a short story, sometimes a faded photograph of a medical team in the Andes, sometimes a silly anecdote about her residency. Nothing that demanded trust, only things that offered it. She never stayed long. She never asked questions about his condition. But she came, and each time, he left the gate unlocked. One night, long after she had gone, Jasper returned a toe, the CD. He pressed play again. The room filled with soft violins and the ache of memory. He sat in the dark, one hand resting lightly on the arm of the chair. Where Claire used to sit, when the track ended, he reached for his phone. He typed a message, paused, then sent it. "If you come tomorrow, bring more mint tea." Elena read it at her kitchen counter, a tired smile blooming across her face. She said nothing to herself, only set her kettle out in preparation. Jasper, upstairs in his room, closed his eyes. It had been months since anyone came into his life without asking him to give something back. Months since he had let anyone close. Eleanor Hale had not asked for anything. She had just shown up, and for the first time in years, Jasper left the music playing as he fell asleep. Rain pressed against the windows like a quiet, steady breath. The storm outside had settled into a rhythm, persistent but not loud, the kind that filled empty spaces without asking permission. Eleanor sat in the leather chair across from Jasper, her hands rapid-airing a cup of mint tea. She did not speak for a long time, neither did he. He had not shaved that day. His hair was damp at the edges from a walk in the garden. He looked in some subtle way more like a person than a monument. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor said, her voice quiet. Jasper glanced at her but said nothing. "Are you afraid of dying?" she asked. "Or are you afraid of surviving and having no one to survive with?" For a moment, the only sound waste rain and the faint clink of ceramic as he set his cup down. "That is not a medical question," he said finally. "No," she replied. "It is a human one." Jasper leaned back in his chair, eyes on fire that burned. Low in the hearth. His voice, when it came, was softer than Thanch had ever heard it. "She was the first person who didn't laugh when I said I wanted to build something that could change the world." Eleanor knew he meant his wife. She did not interrupt. I met her in college. She worked at the library circulation desk, used to make up excuses to check out the same book 3 times. Pause. She was there before the first investors, before Theifer's patent, before the first lawsuit, before the IPO. She believed in Thai version of me that did not exist yet. Jasper's gaze dropped to his hands. He turned his wedding ring slowly on his finger. A simple gold band. He had never taken it off. We were married 9 years. She wanted children. We tried, but she got sick. A minor surgery routine, they said, post-op complications. Nothing that should have happened. Eleanor set her tea down. The air between them heavy, missed something on her chart. Jasper contined. A reaction to a common sedative. She coded. They revived her. Then she coded again and again until they didn't. His voice did not break, but his eyes no longer held their usual steel. 8. I did not get to say goodbye. Just 1 minute she was squeezing my hand, and the next he stopped. She did in a room full of people who told me to trust the process. Another long silence followed. I filed a case, he said. Hired the best legal team. Fought for 18 months. Hospital administration pushed it back. Technicalities, settlements. By the time the verdict came through, all I had was an apology letter and a waiver form. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. That was the last time I stepped into a clinic, Jasper said. Until I collapsed. You did not stop believing in medicine, Eleanor said gently. Stopped believing in the people who failed her. He did. Not deny it. I spent my life building systems, he said. Networks, algorithms, but I could not stop the one glitch that mattered most. Eleanor said nothing. She just moved her chair an inch closer. Not enough to make a statement, just enough to make space. Jasper looked at her, then back at the fire. I am not afraid to die, he said. I'm afraid of living and never feeling safe again. And that Elena realized it was the truth no chart could capture. He was not giving up because he wanted to die. He was retreating, protecting Theon thing he had left, his ability to choose the terms. They sat together as the rain kept falling. Outside the world was gray and slick with stormlight. Butte inside something unspoken shifted. Not enough to call it hope, but enough to call it not the end. The cough came in the middle of a conversation. Jasper had been reciting a passage from an old book, something his wife once underlined in blue ink, when his breath coughed way through a sentence. He turned his head, reached for a tissue, and coughed. The red stain bloomed across white linen like a small, quiet alarm. Eleanor froze. Jasper, she said anxiously. Has this happened before? He wiped his mouth, avoiding her eyes. On CR twice? It is nothing. It is not nothing. She replied, I said no doctors, no hospitals, no more tests. Eleanor's voice tightened. You are already under my care whether you like it or not. Jasper folded the tissue and set it aside. Am not changing Mim into Eleanor? I have my reasons. She did not press him. She only nodded once, seemed left earlier than usual that day, but she could not sleep that night. The image of the blood haunted her, the color, the timing, the way his hand had trembled for a fraction of a second. Shahad's seen it before. In Lattice cases, a window sometimes opened, a narrow, brutal sliver of time when an experimental immunotherapy could make a difference, but only if caught early, only if acted on. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at Jasper's estate with her usual bag. Inside, she had brought mint tea, a newspaper article, and this malist of plans. As Jasper poured the water and turned to check the kettle, she quietly picked up the porcelain teacup he had used the day before. Dried blood lingered on the rim, enough for a panel. That evening, under a different name, she submitted the sample to the research wing of a specialized oncology clinic. Her stomach churned for days afterward. When the results arrived, Eleanor locked herself in her office to read them. Data was unmistakable. Jasper's condition qualified for a trial. Not a guarantee, but a window. A slim fighting chance at life. If they moved quickly, but she had committed a breach. If Ifanone found out, she could lose everything. That if arrived sooner than expected. 2 weeks later, Eleanor was called into the hospital boardroom for an unscheduled disciplinary review. Someone had flagged her anonymous lab request, cross-checked timestamps, patient location, and sample anomalies. The air in the conference room was cold and stiff. An older physician, with wire-rimmed glasses, stared her down from across table. Dr. Hale. Do you deny that you submitted a patient sample under a Fale's name without consent in violation of federal and institutional protocols? Eleanor did not speak. The chairwoman continued, You understand the gravity of this situation. Immediate suspension pending further investigation, possible revocation of your license. Still, Eleanor stayed silent. Her hands lay folded on the table, her throat tight. I did what I believed was right, she finally said. I am not sorry. Then you may be the only one who feels that way, a board member muttered. The door opened. Jasper walked in. He looked like a ghost, but one made of intention, not absence. His posture was tall, high-saw expression, calm, controlled. He wore a dark coat, rain-appled at the collar. Therum froze. I asked her to come, he said. I asked her not to treat me, not to interfere, not to hope. She respected that until I coughed up blood and told her to pretend it was nothing. A pause. "You want to charge someone?" he said, stepping closer. "Charge me, Mr. Whitmore," the chairwoman began.
I would never a medical professional.
"You cannot waive institutional law." "Then call it trespassing," he said. "It emotional blackmail. But do not accuse her of trying to seduce a man who wanted to die only because he was too afraid to live again." Headed toward El Alano now, his voice gentled, but did not waver. "You did not abandon me," he said, "even when I begged you to, even when I made it harder than anyone should have to bear." Eleanor stared at him, blinking hard. "Saving me was wrong," Jasper said, facing bored again. "Then let me be the one to carry the consequence. But let her keep her work. Let her keep the right tawtry to hope." A silence fell. It was not approval, but it was not rejection. It is later, as they stood outside beneath a gray sky, Eleanor looked at him. "You could have let me take Theffa," she whispered. "I would have," he said, "before I met you." The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors and the occasional whisper of 4 drips. Jasper sat upright in bed, thinner than he had been just 2 weeks earlier. The hollows beneath his eyes deepened, his frame leaner, stripped of the armor success had once wrapped around him. But his eyes, they were different now. Sharper, brighter, not with certainty, but with something. Close to it, willingness. He glanced at the small table beside him, where Eleanor had left a folded copy of Theo's treatment schedule. The immunotherapy trial would be aggressive. There would be pain. There would be nausea, disorientation, fatigue, and even then, no promises. Jasper signed the consent form anyway, not because he believed he would survive, but because for the first time in years, someone had believed in him. Not as a CEO, not as a patient, but as a man who might still have something left to live for. The first round hit him like a wave. By day 3, he was soon able to stand without assistance. His appetite vanished. The night sweats came, leaving him gasping, lost between waking and sleep, and Eleanor was always there, not just as his oncologist, though she performed that role with unwavering precision. She adjusted his for herself. She memorized every shift in his vitals. But more than that, she simply stayed. She would sit at the edge of his bed, reading aloud from old medical journals she once loved. She played recordings of piano pieces Jasper's wife had adored. Sometimes she said nothing at all, just stayed. One night, long after visiting hours ended, Jasper opened his eyes and found her sitting in the corner wrapped in a cardigan, legs curled. Beneath her, Ushold, "Go home," he murmured. She shook her head. "You are not my responsibility, me," he added. Eleanor looked at him, her voice soft. "You were never just me. Responsibility, Jasper." He turned his head to the side. "You were afraid?" She blinked. "Of what?" "Of me dying," he said. "Like your father." The room went still. Eleanor's breath caught. Jasper had dread between lines she had never written, and yet he was right. She stood, walked slowly to his bedside, and sat. "Yes," she whispered, "but I stayed. Anyway, because I realized something." "What?" "That sometimes the fear of pain is a shadow of love, and I would rather feel both than nothing at all." Jasper did not respond, but his hand shifted slightly, on the blanket brushing against hers. The next morning, Eleanor found a sealed envelope on her desk. Inside was a revised will signed and witnessed. Jasper did not survive the treatment. His entire estate would be transferred, a medical research institute of her choosing, with one condition. It must bear the name of his late wife, Lydia Whitmore. The letter attached was short, handwritten in his distinct script. "I spent years hating what I could not understand. You helped me see that healing is not the same as forgetting. If I die, let it be in service of something better than silence." Eleanor folded the letter slowly, tears prickling the edge of her vision. That night, she sat beside Jasper again. His face was pale, his body weak. But Wen turned his head toward her. There was no resignation, only light. The ballroom off the Global Oncology Summit gleamed with soft golden light, casting warm reflections across marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Laughter murmured low among elegantly dressed guests, researchers, oncologists, donors, policymakers, gathered from around the world, Camera flashes punctuated the hush as live feeds streamed across monitors, screens flickered with innovations, honors, and endowment figures. The airways full of brilliance, ambition, and the quiet weight of responsibility. And yet, the room did not truly come alive until Jasper Whitmore stepped on a stage. A slight intake of breath could be heard across the audience. Gonwaz, the youthful titan of the tech world, known for his black suits and sharper tongue? What emerged was a man altered, not just by illness, but by something deeper. His once dark hair had returned in streaks of dignified silver. His frame was lean, illness still echoing in the angles of his jaw and the looseness of his suit. But his spine was straight, his steps were sure, and when reached the podium, his eyes moved immediately. Without hesitation, toward the audience, toward her. Eleanor Hale sat in the third row wearing a navy dress and a quiet expression. Her hair was pinned simply, her hands folded tightly in her lap. But her heart was already on that stage, waiting for what she knew and did not. No was coming. The moderator stepped back, offering Jasper the spotlight. He adjusted the microphone, then looked down briefly, collecting himself, or perhaps honoring the gravity of what this moment meant. Then he looked up, gaze steady, and began. "Never thought I would be here," he said, voice calm but certain. "Not on this stage, not in this room, not alive." A ripple passed through the room, uncertainty mixed with awe. "I am not here because I fought harder than anyone else. I am not here because I deserve a second chance more. I am here because someone did not walk away." The room fell into stillness. Even the servers at the back of the ballroom stopped moving. She never forced thy Sue, never lectured or pushed past the walls I'd built. She brought tea, music, silence. She brought herself. Somehow in all the quiet, she made space for me to return. Jasper turned his head slightly, as if inviting the room to feel what he felt. His voice softened. I had given up, not dramatically, just entirely. I blamed everyone and everything but the truth that I was grieving so deeply, I mistook it for clarity. He paused. No one filled the silence. And then Eleanor Hale, Wakadinto. My life, not as a miracle, but as a mirror. She never begged me to live. She simply reminded me how. Eleanor blinked hard, holding back emotion, but her throat ocked. Jasper reached into his pocket and unfolded a crisp piece off paper. Today I am announcing the creation of a permanent endowment for the Eleanor Hale Institute for Integrative Oncology. This initiative will support research in patient-centered care, early detection, and post-treatment emotional recovery. We will also fund community programs that put compassion back into the clinical model. He held up the document.
This is not
Just an announcement. It is my apology to the field of medicine and my promise to every patient who ever felt unseen. And most of all, to the person who saw me before I saw myself. Applause rose like a wave. Then a second wave stronger. A standing ovation. Thecamares turned. But when Eleanor rose from her seat and quietly walked toward the stage, the crowd hushed again. Her heels tapped softly against the floor, deliberate and unhurried. She reached Jasper. He turned. She said nothing. She took no microphone. Instead, she reached for his hand. There was no performance, no kiss, no ring, just one gesture, honest, human, whole. Two people standing in the light after so much darkness. And in that silence, Jasper smiled. Not for the cameras, but for her. The house no longer echoed. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window as Eleanor poured hot water into a teapot. Mint and chamomile. The blend Jasper had memorized from their earliest days. At a side, a small wind chime sang softly, the melody gentle like the morning. A year had passed since the night Jasper stood on stage and gave away the empire he once built on silence. Now that empire hummed with life. The Eleanor Hale Institute had already provided treatment for dozens of patients, many of them survivors who once believed they were out of time. Their search wing had received its second grant. Laner spent her days between patient consultations, mentoring young physicians and taking quiet breaks with a man who no longer needed to hide from the world. Jasper sat at the gardenable under the lemon tree, stirring sugar into her cup before she arrived, something he did each morning. Even Winch beat him to it. He was thinner than the man who once ran tech empires, his char now mostly silver. But his eyes were brighter, kinder, he smiled Moreno, sometimes for no reason at all. Eleanor walked out and sat across from him, accepting the cup with a nod. You know, one day I am going to switch to coffee, just to test you, she teased. I will. Adapt, he replied deadpan, then added eventually. That afternoon, Eleanor was scheduled to speak at a medical school. She stood in front of a room full of students, white coats crisp, eyes bright with ambition. I did not cure cancer, she told them honestly. I found someone who no longer wanted to live and stayed until he changed his mind. No applause followed. Only a pause, then a wave of quiet understanding. The next morning, as the sunlight painted gold across the backyard, Jasper brought her tea. Same blend, same cup. But this time, when she lifted the lid, there was a ring nestled inside. Simple silver. Nothing flashy, just a promise. Eleanor did not cry. She did not need a question to be asked. She set the cup down, leaned across the table, and kissed him. They married without ceremony. No press, no vows, under chandeliers. Just 2 signatures, 2 witnesses. And a 3-year-old girl in a blue dress who kept trying to draw on the marriage certificate. Her name was Hope. She had been abandoned after completing her final round of leukemia treatment. They met her during a hospital visit, and from that day on, she never left their hearts. Eleanor and Jasper brought her home on a Thursday. She clung to Eleanor's hair when she first slept in her own bed. Jasper learned how to braid, and in the garden, life unfolded again. Eleanor read aloud from a book under the soft sun, glasses sliding down her nose. Jasper sat beside her, trying to fix a crooked hair clip on Hope's wild curls while she giggled. Tipping her cup and splashing tea down her little pink dress, Hope laughed louder and they all laughed with her. Jasper looked at Eleanor, eyes full. Of everything he had never planned for, Butno could not imagine losing. Then he whispered just loud enough for her to hear. You were never my last patient, Eleanor. You were my first reason to want more time. Sometimes the most powerful healing does not come from medicine, but from someone who chooses to stay. Jasper Whitmore was ready to die, not because his body failed, but because his heart had stopped believing in life. And Eleanor Hale simply stayed long enough for him to remember how to want more time. This was not a story about survival. It was a story about choosing love, even when it hurts. About choosing life, even when it scares you. If this story touched your heart and you're drawn to quiet bravery, emotional healing, and love that grows in the unlikeliest places, then you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to Soul Stirring. Stories for more tales that remind us even in our darkest hours, one person's kindness can light the way back. Thank you for watching and for feeling with us.